So a little introduction to myself. My name is Bygrave. I have over a decade of experience within the gaming industry, mainly on the publisher side. So I spent quite a while working in the commercial organization within Activision. But I now, as you can see, am at Gfinity, heading up the publisher and developer relationships here, because it's extraordinarily important that we have good relationships with people such as yourselves, which is one of the reasons I'm here today. So founded in 2012, Gfinity has really strong foundations in esports and competitive play. We have run loads of events, from sort of the massive pro leagues to the smaller grassroots tournaments, using our own tournament platform. Plus, some of you may have actually been to our arena in Fulham, which, as you can see some pictures of there. Our expertise over the years, though, has evolved to include the community engagement. Mark's made some really good points about the importance of the community engagement side of esports. And we ourselves have an audience of millions of gamers across our channels. And ultimately, our goal as a company is that we want to make sure that everything we do is fun for the players, is beneficial for our clients, and ultimately is enriching the time that people are spending within the gaming space, whether that's playing, watching, or however they want to be getting involved. So when you think of esports, this is kind of the image that you think about. Massive arenas with pro players, huge audiences, fancy productions, big sponsors. And you're not wrong. It's true that there are massive sponsorship deals to be had, the likes of Red Bull, Coca-Cola, mobile carriers, car manufacturers, they've all got involved. There's big money flowing around in the esports scene. But the downside is that these tournaments cost huge amounts of money to run. Multi-million-dollar prizes are not unusual, not to mention kind of the cost of actually running the tournament, the production, the broadcasting, all the staffing costs. And even the big games and the massive publishers have struggled to kind of make it viable and sustainable. But what I really want you guys to take away from what I'm going to talk through today is that you don't actually need to spend big to take advantage of the benefits that esports and competitive gaming in general has to offer. And the reason of this, and I'm pleased that James and I have a similar definition of esports here, is because basically grassroots tournaments and esports are the same. If we look at the kind of the core foundations of each, both grassroots and the full esports tournaments have, they have players, they have tournaments, and they have prizing. The difference, and the way that I personally see it, is that esports has the scale. They've got the pro players and they've got the viewership. But what's really important to note is that professional esports really is a natural progression of a successful grassroots tournament. Fundamentally, they are the same. It's just how many people are watching it and how many pro players that you have. Now, Mark made a really good point about not wanting to pigeonhole esports along with traditional sports. And I certainly agree with his assessment there. But I think it is important to take learnings from our traditional sports. So let's take a look at football here in the UK. Yes, you have the top tier of the Premier League, but it's only really made possible by the multiple leagues below. The existence of these lower leagues and the ladder system makes the Premier League feel more accessible. You have the threat of promotion and relegation to be adding to the drama, something a certain Super League would do well to remember. But if you look at that lower end of the pyramid, you can see that the natural leagues and amateur games really are the bedrock of this entire system. You've got groups getting together for a kickabout with no hope of playing in the Premier League, but they're having fun with the game regardless. And that's because it all starts with competitive players. So moving this actually back to gaming, we know that 9 in 10 competitive gamers are playing more than 2 hours in an average session. Plus, they're twice as likely as a casual gamer to play for at least 5 hours in an average session. These gamers are playing your games more, and they're playing them for longer. And we also know, kind of anecdotally, that these players are generally more engaged with your game as well. They talk about your game. They're watching YouTube videos. They're watching Twitch gameplay. They're cheerleading your game. They're not just playing it. They're involved in other aspects of their lives as well. And when they are playing, they're spending more money. So there's a real tangible benefit to this as well. You can see here that the competitive gamers are spending more likely to spend money every month than casual or even esports viewers. And 40% of them are spending more than $25 a month on games and in-game purchases. And apologies for this being in dollars, but that was where the stats came from. And they are twice as likely as casual gamers to spend money on gaming accessories. And although these stats happened to record it in dollars, I should note that these numbers specifically were for the UK. So what I'm saying here is to focus on the foundations, and then pro leagues will naturally follow as your game scales. So let's have a look at kind of a few things that you guys need to be considering when you're thinking about how is this all going to be fitting in with what I'm doing with my game. I think the most important thing here is to really think about how your players will play and what makes it fun. Mark made a great point about the importance of a balanced, fun game. People are playing your games because they are fun. Again, you might assume only certain games like FPS, fighting, sports are relevant here, but that's simply not true. What about speed running? I remember doing Sonic speed runs when I was younger. People do it on Mario 64 and on single player games. It's quite a compassionate community. It's certainly not what the developers intended, but that's how the players are choosing to have fun. They are playing because it's fun. Grassroots tournaments should enhance that fun. We shouldn't be shoehorning in competition where it simply doesn't work. So again, this happens to tie quite nicely with what Mark was saying. Think about how all of this is fitting in with your overall engagement strategy. You would be amazed at how many people come to me saying, I want to run a tournament, and are surprised when my response is why. So often our clients are not considering kind of how a tournament is going to support their overall goals. And as mentioned earlier, it's very easy to throw a lot of money at this and you run this amazing event and then afterwards think, what did we actually get out of that? So yes, obviously here at Gfinity, we think that grassroots tournaments and pro leagues are a part of the community engagement strategy, an important part, but there should be other elements supporting it as well. You should be talking to your community about the latest game news, game hints and tips, help them play the game, help them find the fun. You should be encouraging discussion. As mentioned, these competitive players are real cheerleaders for your game. Encourage that, get involved with that sort of chat. You should be talking about the latest tournament highlights. And again, this doesn't need to be a pro league. You could just be talking about something funny that happened in a grassroots event, kind of, again, the way football does with the minor leagues. User-generated content we know is absolutely huge. This is essentially free marketing for you guys. We should be encouraging it. You should be seeing how your community is getting involved with your game. And you should be rewarding them for getting involved as well and incentivizing it. And this leads on to the next important point for you to be considering when you kind of want to go down this route. And that is about rewarding grassroots players regardless of their skill level. When we at Gfinity were trying to crack the best grassroots formula, we did a bit of research within our gaming community around what put them off tournaments. And the most popular answers were long run times, toxic opponents, and skill level. So tournaments were dying because they were simply not fun and there was no incentive to continue. Players were seeing the same winners week in, week out, and just kind of got bored with it. But what we have found is that you can avoid this and you can maintain that fun by rewarding the players for engaging with the game the way that they want to. So of course, reward them for getting involved in a tournament, but tie that in with rewards for actually just playing the game on their own, for completing in-game challenges, reading the latest news. It doesn't even need to be gameplay, sharing their content, and watching esports as well if you have leagues to that levels. And I want to be super clear here that by rewards I don't mean cash. I mean things like community badges, in-game cosmetics. You don't need to be spending huge amounts of money on this kind of thing. And we know how much gamers love sort of the in-game smaller rewards. And in fact, if you want to run bigger tournaments with physical prizes, then to be honest, accessories and components are the way to go. Again, when we asked our audience what they consider to be a high value prize, only 2% of our community said cash. And incidentally, even less said a PS5. Instead, by far the most attractive prizes were products and components from, unsurprisingly, Nvidia. I mean, we all want a card at the moment, but from Nvidia, Logitech, Asus, Razer, it was those sorts of accessories that our community was saying that's what they valued the most from these sorts of tournaments. And then the last thing that you should be considering is, of course, the features within the game. And you might be wondering why this is last. And that is because, as I said, you should be thinking about the earlier points much prior to thinking about what your features should look like. You shouldn't be shoehorning features in that you don't need or that aren't going to complement the play style. First, you need to really sit down and have a think about how it is your players want to play your game and what makes it fun. And then consider popping in a couple of basic features to support that. Again, it doesn't need to be, spectator cameras or anything really fancy. It could just be a leaderboard. It could just be a little timer for speed running in game. You don't need to throw tons and tons of features. There are tournament platforms out there, obviously ours, but there are multiple other tournament platforms out there that can do that for you if you get to the point of needing additional support. But by including the basics, such as leaderboards or timers, you can run things yourself and you will have the foundations for bigger programs in the future, because esports will grow as your great game grows. I said it before, I say it again, you don't need to spend massive amounts of money for this. By laying the foundations, you'll be in a great place. As your game grows, your approach to the tournaments is going to scale along with it. I think a great example of a game doing sort of everything that I have spoken about here is one that you may have heard of, a small game called Fortnite. So not only have Fortnite gone from being kind of a small, lesser known title to, let's be honest, a global phenomenon, but they've actually managed to sustain it, which at the moment is quite difficult to kind of keep people's attention. They have these foundations in place. They have their big leagues, sure, but it's supported by an accessible grassroots tournament and reward programs as well. And they tie this all together with news hubs, detailing the latest in-game happenings, the latest tournament highlights. And again, it's kind of that two-way communication, with esports being part of that. So to summarize here, the benefits of targeting those competitive gamers through sort of a grassroots and community program is clear. And what I really want to emphasize is that these benefits apply regardless of whether you end up with a full esports program or not. So it's absolutely worth doing sort of in the early days. You're going to be deepening engagement with your players, keeping them playing your game for longer. You're going to have that two-way community dialogue. You're going to hear what your players are actually enjoying and adapting. And again, Mark made a great point about pivoting. You'll be able to see how people are getting involved in your game and adjust sort of your next updates based on that. You can also potentially be reviving those lapsed players, introducing them to more of your games. Perhaps you have one community over here and you're launching a new game. If you've already got the communication and the dialogue open with them, you can just let them know that you've got your other game launching. You're of course going to be talking to those active spenders in your community. As I mentioned, those people are the cheerleaders for your game. So you want to be keeping up that communication and keeping them engaged and keeping them happy. And ultimately, not wanting to sound cynical here, but you're going to be driving your post-launch revenues, which is always going to be beneficial. But you're going to be doing it in a way that is organic. It doesn't feel like corporate sellouts. Gamers, and again, this is kind of an anecdotal thing that we see through our community, but gamers don't actually mind paying for things. But where you start to get the pushback is when they feel like they're paying for too much. If you're selling them a really expensive full price game, and then on top of that a £40 season pass, and then on top of that in-game cosmetics, at that point they start saying, come on, like, we just want to play the game. But it's okay for you to be talking to them about supporting you and supporting your game, and by having that dialogue it will feel organic. And if you're going in with that approach of what tournaments are going to make this fun, how can I be giving back to my players and keep them playing, gamers will be more than happy to get involved in that way. So as I mentioned, we do have an engagement platform, which is currently used to run everything from kind of small singular events to kind of fully bespoke, completely integrated kind of community solutions and all the things that I've talked about. But don't worry, I'm not trying to sort of push this all on you. There are definitely other platforms out there. The reason that I wanted to mention this to you guys is because I wanted to let you know that we're currently working on a massive update, which will allow developers to run sort of fully branded, automated tournaments at a click of a button. But as I'm sure you all know, we need to test it before we can roll it out. So if anyone is interested, we would absolutely love for people to sort of test this out and let us know what you think about it. Of course, we'll be showing our appreciation by offering testers sort of free access once the update goes live, etc. But if you want to hear more, then please just give me a shout. But in general, if you want to have a chat about anything, then just reach out to me directly. I am a big nerd. I love just generally chatting about the industry and chatting about games. So if you want to just drop me a mail and just arrange a chat, give me your insights, your views, I love to hear it. So please do feel free to reach out. And I think then we can move into some Q&A if anything's come up, Sam.
Wonderful, Catherine. Thank you very much for that. Particularly like the idea of rewarding grassroots players. I mean, it's something that people often overlook and don't consider. So that's excellent. A really good summary. Thank you very much for that. I'm quite interested in, you talk about building a community and those kinds of activities and the benefits of doing so, but how do you actually create one in the first place? How do you get those people to come and play your game?
Yeah, that's great, and a great question. And obviously, it has to be an organic approach, right? You of course will have some media budgets that you might be pushing, but it's no good throwing tons of money at it if you don't have sort of an organic way of reaching out to these people. So I think Mark made a really good point earlier around having kind of that authentic discussion. And developers, having spoken to many, I know that you are all very passionate about what you're doing and you're passionate about your game. You don't need to hide that. So please do, when you're reaching out to people on Reddit, on Discord, when you're looking at spending your media money, make sure that you're maintaining that message, and make sure that you are keeping kind of that voice, and you're not allowing yourselves to become silenced or fall into the trap of thinking, I need to sound professional, I need to sound corporate. Nowadays gamers prefer sort of, and we see that kind of on Twitter, even with the major companies, gamers prefer that real voice, and to understand that there are humans behind what they're doing and what they're making, and these humans really care about the game as much as they do. In terms of actually how to get the numbers, then I would certainly defer to my learned colleague around media. That's not my area. But I think that that voice is something that I would encourage everyone to hang on to as closely as possible.
Is there sort of a magic number of people that you need to be playing your game to, when you're going through the testing phase and just checking it and making sure that you're starting that engagement process? Is there sort of a magic number that you need to get to? You can say no.
I think it's
question, but
I would say there probably is, but annoyingly, it's going to really depend on what it is that you're doing, right?
Yeah,
so if your game is a single player game, of course, you don't need as many people as if your game is relying on loads of matchmaking sort of across the world. You're going to need different levels of testing. But as with all these things, it will scale. And, again, I'm sure Stuart will kind of talk about this in a bit more detail later on, but the way that you should be testing your games and getting feedback is it should be scalable. You start small and you grow it. There's no point trying to launch a massive, huge test of something without getting initial feedback first, because it's going to be time consuming, it's going to be expensive. You want to be checking in and saying, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking. Push it out to a few people, and if everyone hates it, at least you've not wasted a ton of time, and you can pivot and adjust it based on that.
That's excellent, thank you. And you mentioned about just in passing, talking about people getting disillusioned because the same people win the competitions, or perhaps there's some toxicity within some of those channels. Have you got a system for dealing with those particular issues, particularly the toxic opponent challenge?
Oh yes, absolutely. And we have our own policies. We'll of course sort of go along with what our client wants, but we also fall back on ultimately this should be fun for everybody. So we feel very strongly that we want to be involving kind of, so we feel very strongly that we should be keeping it a fun environment for everybody. So regardless of sort of what a client's policies are, Gfinity will be saying that, you know, we're not going to accept swearing, we're not going to accept insults, we're not going to be accepting the sorts of behaviours that we have seen at some tournaments before. And, you know, I will admit that does sometimes create a little bit of friction, but we would prefer to not run a tournament and to kind of lose out on that than to be encouraging those sorts of behaviours. And it is something that, you know, we've seen that our clients are actually quite pleased to see. You know, I would say that pro players have been given a lot of space over the years, and we're now starting to see the negatives of that, and we're starting to see the players that are watching no longer really accepting that. And whereas a few years ago the larger publishers were worried about alienating pro players, we're now seeing that there's more of a standing up to them and saying, actually, no, we don't want to see this kind of behaviour. We want this to be accessible to everybody. And that applies both at a pro level, but then also at the grassroots level as well. And to your point, yes, of course, you know, any platform worth its salt should be having tools in place to be highlighting that, both a kind of a mix of automatic and manual checks as well, to make sure it is fun for everybody.
Yeah, some interesting trends there around the attitude and the approach towards pro players. Now, talking about your platform, I don't really want to give you a chance to promote yourself too much, but I'm quite interested in, if we look at if you look at the last 18 months, we've been in lockdown. There's been more games played and more time spent playing games, people using it for social interaction and lots of other reasons. But have you seen a significant change in the approach from publishers and developers coming to you talking about the need to build engagement and sort of esports strategies? Have you seen a change in that at all?
Definitely.
Seen, if so. So what's the change you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the biggest change has actually come from the sponsors. You know, the gaming industry in general is quite clued in terms of sort of how important tournaments and community is. I mean, generally, obviously, people still need support, but the biggest change has been from the brands who, with the absence of sporting events, are now looking to gaming and have recognized that gaming is pretty bomb-proof in terms of it's very accessible. We can always run tournaments. We certainly saw it last year with our F1 leagues, in that we had it all planned to be a physical event and then had to turn it around to be an online event. And, you know, all of the sponsors were amazed that this was even possible. And we're starting to see sort of more and more sponsors thinking, hey, what's this esports buzzword thing? How can we be getting involved in it? But certainly, you know, internally within the gaming industry, we're seeing more of a focus on the community. And I would say that isn't so much a COVID reason and a lockdown reason, but a more natural progression. You know, we see that in media, more money is now being spent on influencers than on TV advertising, for example. And I think everybody is starting to recognize that a player is not just in one place. Yes, they're playing your game. Yes, but then, you know, they're also watching YouTube and they're reading articles and they're watching TV. It needs to be an entire approach, and you need to consider their lifestyle rather than just thinking about esports in silo and then this one little grassroots in silo. You know, it all needs to come together and support your overall goals.
That's fabulous. Nice positive note to end on then as well. So